Now, Michael, lovely to see you. Let's start off with the price that the Greens are going to tell Labor they have to pay. Joel, 700% renewables. Now, they're, of course, going to say, we're never going to get into a power sharing arrangement. We're not going to stand there and sign the piece of paper like we did in 2010. But if you need their preferences to get elected and you need their votes to pass something in the parliament, guess what they're going to be able to do? This is one hell of a tail that's getting ready to wag Albo's dog.
Let me give you two great lines from the Australian vernacular, Paul. Tell them they're dreaming and over my dead body. We are still suffering the consequences politically of the arrangement we entered into with the Greens back in 2010. It should never be done again. I'll fight against it happening again. And Labor has only one objective, and that is, of course, to win government in its own right.
But Michael Kroger, you know that that inevitably part of the push that Albo and others will do is they'll say, well, they can only get there based off the preferences of Pauline Hanson. They can only get there based off the preferences of Palmer. And what will that mean when we finally get to Canberra? But the Greens, it's not a joke. It's more than a dozen current sitting MPs that are only there because of Greens preferences. And you don't think that given the chance to squeeze Albo, they won't do it on day one in the Senate?
Yeah, mate, of course they will. Of course they will. They won't be able to resist. But, you know, Albo, let's be very clear about this, and Joel knows this as well as we all do. Albanese's policy for the next election is to run dead on everything, to be non-controversial, to do nothing, to be a night watchman, you know, the number 11 sent in at the fall of the first wicket. He wants to create no controversy and have nothing that Scott Morrison can attack him over, because they've learnt from the 19 election, if we have a bold policy which is, you know, wacko, we'll get beaten over the head. So he's avoiding what the great former Queensland Premier Premier J.B. Alki-Peterson said when he said that it's very awkward for a man to sit on a barbed wire fence with one leg on one side and one on the other side. Albo's going to avoid that. He's going to sit on a little concrete stool and not move. And so you're going to see him running dead on this and every other policy issue, Paul, between now and the next election.
And Matt, you know, we know that Bob Brown and his convoy of no courage was such an important thing in North Queensland last time. But the Greens are telling us up front what their plan is. So that means if they get that seat in central Brisbane like they are hoping to do on their hit list, if they get into the Senate and they're in a position to be able to push, they're telling us up front. What does 700% renewable mean to you?
Well, first of all, I will give Joel his due here. I think he genuinely does not support this policy, and he'd love to make sure that the Labor Party didn't do deals with Greens after the election. But Joel, if you want to convince the Australian people that you won't do a dirty deal with the Greens after the election, don't do dirty deals with them before an election. And if you really think this 700% renewable energy target is crazy, as it clearly is, don't take their preferences. Put the Greens last. Put them last in every seat, and then we'll know you're serious. But that's not what's going to happen. Anthony Albanese will go to the election taking Green preferences. The only way Labor can win is through those things, and we'll never know what kind of deal they've done in the background to get that, let alone maybe after the election, as you say, Paul, if they get that seat. But what this means, Paul, is that our country, the Greens don't mind if our country is blanketed with solar panels and wind turbines everywhere. That means we won't be able to grow food. It means we won't be able to have mines. We will not be able to move in regional Australia because there'll be all these mirrors placed everywhere and big fans that kill birds. That's what their plans are. Because this renewable energy stuff, it sounds great, but it's land mass, the amount of land it takes up, it destroys so much farmland, it is made from such toxic chemicals in Africa and all these minerals that get processed. It is not great for the environment. It might lower emissions, but it's not great for the natural environment. And I want to defend and protect our environment, not see our landscape destroyed with these things all over the place.
Now hang on, Paul.
So, Joel, what's your free advice? You respond and then I'll follow up.
Well, Matt's LNP, his own state branch, preferenced the Greens in Brisbane at the last state election.
Yeah, it was a mistake. I agree with that. We won't be doing that at the federal election. I can rule that out now, Joel. That won't be happening.
And of course, he challenged us not to accept Greens preferences. I'll challenge him not to accept One Nation preferences, the same One Nation which voted in the Senate to change the hard-fought wins we've had in the courts to protect casual workers in the coal mining industry. So that's the One Nation and their support for coal miners. So much for all of that. And can I just say to Michael about, his charge that Albo is sitting on the fence. I mean, Scott Morrison only promised one thing at the last election, and that was to change nothing. And outside COVID, that's one election promise he's absolutely kept.
So, Michael, what about this year? I've got to say, there is one hell of a door being opened here for the Greens. Are the Libs smart enough to know how to push it and push hard every day between now and when we get that election?
Well, mate, I would think so. I mean, what we know from the 2019 election was that the skills of Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg murdered Labor in that 6 months period. I mean, Scott Morrison was dead, cremated, and buried and cremated, to use Tony Abbott's term, in November 18 after the Victorian state election. We had a 5% swing against us here. There was a 20% swing against us in the month before in the Wentworth by-election. We lost Malcolm Turnbull's seat. You remember at the end of 18, the Liberal Party brand was toxic, and 6 months later, lo and behold, Scott Morrison scores this incredible victory. So there's a year to the next election. I don't think there's going to be an election this year for all sorts of reasons. The recent events have obviously contributed to that. And the big issue in this election will be the economic recovery from COVID. Who is best placed to do that? And who is best placed to protect jobs? And you'd be nutso to think that the Labor Party would be the best place to protect your job, particularly if you're a mining worker, if Albo's get elected. I mean, Joel, to be quite frank, no one's got any idea whatsoever what the Labor Party policy is on coal mines, on gas, on anything. We know what your view is, and if you were the leader, you'd win. But what is Albo's view on what you think, mate?
All of those industries. Our formal position is to support all of those industries, and we do, and we will. We always have and always will.
So Anthony Albanese supports all existing coal mines.
You need to get on Zoom this week.
Great.
You need to get onto Zoom this week, Joel.
Does he support more coal mines?
You have such a statement in the national platform.
It'll be there.
Yeah,
It'll be there, Matt. Don't you worry about that.
Okay.
Will it be in his speech?
All right,
will Albo's speech to the national conference
this week?
I'm looking forward to Albo's speech at the national conference, Paul, where Albo's going to commit to more coal mines.
And gas will be recognised in the party's platform.
Okay, I'm going to have to ask the